Disclaimer: this story is a fictional dramatization created for entertainment purposes only. While it explores complex emotions like love, trust, betrayal, and heartbreak, it does not depict real individuals or actual events. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Viewer discretion is advised, as the story contains mature themes including infidelity and relationship conflicts. Life in our quiet neighborhood had always felt safe, predictable, and comforting. Our streets were lined with small houses, each with its own little garden, where neighbors greeted each other and watched out for one another. I had lived here for years, and over time, this neighborhood had become more than just a place to live. It was a community that felt like family. My husband and I had built a life here that I thought was perfect. Our cozy home, the little routines we shared, and the friendships that had grown around us. Among those friends was the neighbor's son, a young man who had been part of the neighborhood for as long as I could remember. He had always been polite, charming, and respectful, someone you could trust immediately. From the very beginning, our interactions were simple and friendly. He would help with minor errands, offer to carry groceries when he saw me struggling, and we often exchanged casual conversations at the mailbox. At first, it was nothing more than friendly neighborly gestures, but over time, his presence became a comforting part of my daily routine. It felt natural to invite him into small parts of my life, from casual chats over coffee to discussing neighborhood events. He was friendly, caring, and seemingly innocent in every way. I had no reason to doubt him, and I considered him almost like an extended part of my family. I also loved my husband dearly, and in our early years of marriage, everything seemed perfect. He was attentive, loving, and incredibly supportive. Together, we had built routines, traditions, and memories that gave me a sense of stability I had never known before. Weekends were spent exploring small trips around town, while evenings often involved cozy dinners at home or watching movies together. We were close, comfortable, and deeply in love, or at least that's how I thought things were. In my eyes, life was harmonious, filled with affection and shared laughter. My best friendships and neighborly bonds also strengthened my sense of safety and happiness. The neighbor's son was always present in the background, helpful, warm, and cheerful, but I never imagined the complexities that could quietly creep into such an innocent connection. I trusted him because I trusted our neighborhood, our community, and my own judgment. I never considered that even seemingly harmless closeness could evolve into something far more complicated, something that might challenge the very foundation of my marriage. Every day felt calm, almost idyllic. I was grateful for a loving husband, a stable home, and a close-knit community that gave life a sense of predictability and security. In my mind, nothing could shake this peace. Not betrayal, not temptation, not any outside interference. I had woven trust into every part of my life, unaware that the threads I had so carefully placed could one day unravel in ways I would never anticipate. Life before that pivotal night felt perfect, comfortable, and safe. I believed that our relationships, especially the ones that had been built over years, were unbreakable. Little did I know that this sense of security would soon be tested in ways I could never have imagined, setting the stage for a night that would change everything forever. From the outside, our marriage looked flawless. Friends admired our connection, neighbors envied our partnership, and I myself felt fortunate to have found a husband who seemed to love me unconditionally. He was patient, attentive, and always seemed to know what I needed, even when I didn't say a word. Our routines were filled with simple joys: weekend breakfasts together, long walks in the neighborhood, shared jokes, and quiet evenings at home. I felt safe, valued, and cherished in a way that many people could only hope for. But beneath the surface of what I considered perfection, small cracks began to appear, almost imperceptibly. It started with subtle shifts in behavior, moments that seemed insignificant at the time but would later reveal themselves as early warning signs. He began to spend more time texting, sometimes at odd hours, often glancing at his phone and smiling in ways that didn't feel natural. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was simply work-related or casual chatting with friends. I trusted him, and I trusted our marriage, so my instincts didn't immediately raise alarms. Then came the subtle changes in our interactions. He seemed distracted during conversations, sometimes zoning out mid-discussion, while other times he would laugh at something I couldn't understand. It was confusing because he still treated me with love and respect. But the tiny inconsistencies began to plant seeds of doubt in my mind. I noticed how often he mentioned the neighbor's son in casual stories or anecdotes, sometimes praising him for small gestures or achievements. While these mentions seemed innocent, they began to feel like a pattern, a focus of attention that hadn't been there before. I also started noticing shifts in my own feelings. The trust and confidence I had taken for granted began to mingle with a creeping sense of unease. Questions formed in my mind. Why is he smiling at that text? Why does he talk about him so often? Am I imagining things? I told myself repeatedly that I was overthinking. After all, I had built my life on trust, and I refused to let paranoia interfere with what I believed was a strong, unbreakable bond. Despite these early signs, life largely continued as normal. We still shared dinners, weekend plans, and quiet nights together. But in the small gaps of time, the moments when he stepped out of the room to take a call, the glances at the phone left on the counter, the little jokes I didn't understand, I felt tension quietly building. My heart would tighten for no reason, and a nagging suspicion began to shadow my daily routine. I realized that doubt, once planted, grows quietly and persistently. It didn't announce itself loudly. It lingered in the corners of my mind, in the pauses between conversations, in the fleeting moments when he seemed distant. What began as subtle signs eventually evolved into a faint but persistent whisper. Something wasn't right. That's when I started paying closer attention, watching interactions, noticing small behaviors I had previously overlooked. And that's when I began to sense that the life I believed was perfect might not be as stable as I thought. The seeds of betrayal were there, hidden in laughter, glances, and conversations, quietly waiting for the right moment to grow into something undeniable. Backhand index pointing right. This is heading 2, 500 words, in paragraph storytelling style. Say next, and I'll write heading 3, subtle warnings, late visits and secretive behavior. You said, next ChatGPT said. Here's the next chapter, where tension starts building crescent moon. The first time I noticed something was off, it was subtle enough that I almost ignored it. He had stopped by our house one evening under the pretense of returning a borrowed book. I thought nothing of it. After all, he had always been courteous, and we had shared friendly visits for years. But that night, the way he lingered just a moment too long, the way our eyes met, left a strange flutter in my chest that I couldn't explain. I chalked it up to imagination and dismissed the feeling. Then came the late-night texts. My husband would leave his phone face down on the counter, claiming it was work messages, but occasionally I'd catch glimpses of words that seemed oddly intimate, playful, almost flirtatious in nature. My heart would skip a beat, yet I told myself it was nothing. Perhaps I was too quick to read into friendly banter. But the feeling of unease didn't go away. It grew quietly, like shadows stretching across a room as the sun sets. There were other, more subtle signs. He would sometimes appear unexpectedly at our door with no clear reason, his timing always convenient for moments when I was alone. The excuses seemed plausible, innocent even, but each visit carried a tension I couldn't ignore. Conversations that were once lighthearted and casual began to take on undertones I didn't fully understand. They laughed together at jokes I didn't hear, shared stories that left me on the outskirts, and when I asked questions, the laughter abruptly stopped. Even my husband's behavior began to change. He became unusually protective of his phone and computer, and sometimes he would go quiet when she was around, his expressions flickering for only a second before returning to normal. It was subtle enough that I could doubt my own perceptions, but persistent enough to gnaw at my thoughts. I began to notice patterns. She appeared during times when he was most alone, and he seemed to anticipate her visits in ways that made me uncomfortable. I remember one afternoon vividly. I had returned from running errands and found them talking in the living room. Their posture, their tone, and the easy way they leaned toward each other struck me as different from the friendly rapport I had always known. When I walked in, they separated instantly, forcing smiles that felt strained. My stomach twisted in unease, and though they insisted everything was normal, the tension lingered in the room like a thick fog. Each small action, the lingering glance, the playful touch, the inside joke I didn't understand, was a warning sign, subtle yet undeniable. The universe seemed to conspire to test my instincts, and deep down I knew that if I continued to ignore these signs, the consequences could be devastating. The creeping unease became a constant companion. I found myself checking phone screens when no one was looking, noticing every shift in body language, and analyzing every interaction. My mind became a quiet battlefield, torn between trust and suspicion. I had always believed that love and honesty could withstand anything, but now, doubts had taken root. The very people I trusted most, the ones I welcomed into my life and heart, were beginning to blur the line between friendship and something more. Those subtle warnings were the early tremors of a quake I couldn't yet see, but soon enough, the ground beneath my life would shift completely. And in that silence, in the moments when I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the seeds of betrayal quietly began to take hold. It started as an ordinary evening, just like any other, but I didn't realize how ordinary nights could quickly become life-changing. I had returned home from a long day, exhausted, and my husband was still working in his study. The neighbor's son knocked on the door, alone, unannounced. Normally, I might have smiled and waved him off, but something made me open the door. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was a desire for companionship after a long, lonely day. Whatever it was, I let him in, telling myself it was harmless. At first, the conversation was mundane. He talked about school, small neighborhood updates, and other trivial matters that seemed innocent enough. We laughed, shared memories, and reminisced about earlier years. But as the evening progressed, the energy in the room subtly shifted. His presence was different than before, more deliberate, more attentive, more aware of the space between us. I could feel tension simmering in ways I didn't fully understand, a magnetic pull I tried to ignore but couldn't. I remember the moment vividly. He reached for a book on the shelf, brushing past me, and I felt a spark of electricity run through the room. It wasn't physical in a crude sense, but it was there, a charged awareness, a heightened closeness that neither of us could deny. My heart raced, guilt and excitement mingling in equal measure. I knew I was crossing an invisible boundary, but at that moment, it felt almost inevitable. The conversation turned personal. He began asking about my marriage in subtle, probing ways, not in an intrusive or accusatory manner, but in a tone that suggested a deep curiosity, a desire to understand me beyond surface-level interactions. I answered cautiously, aware of every nuance in my voice, every flicker of emotion I couldn't hide. Each question made the atmosphere thicker, more intense, and yet I felt a strange comfort in talking to someone who seemed to listen so attentively. At one point, we both laughed at a shared memory from years ago, something innocuous, but the way our eyes met made the room feel smaller, as if the world outside had disappeared entirely. I noticed the way he leaned slightly closer, the subtle mirroring of my posture, the warmth in his expression. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. My instincts screamed that this was wrong, but my heart betrayed me, drawn toward the attention I hadn't realized I was missing. By the time he left, I was trembling, not just from guilt, but from the overwhelming realization that something had shifted irrevocably. That night, the simple act of letting him in had changed everything. I felt both exhilaration and dread, the duality of excitement and fear coiling tightly in my chest. My home, once a sanctuary of trust and stability, now felt charged with unspoken possibilities and hidden dangers. I went to bed that night beside my husband, pretending that nothing had happened, while my mind replayed every word, every glance, every subtle touch. I knew, deep down, that boundaries had been crossed, and that life as I had known it would never be the same again. That night was the catalyst, The moment when a seemingly innocent decision opened the door to a chain of events that would challenge everything I believed about love, loyalty, and trust. In the days and weeks following that night, life became a confusing mix of guilt, anticipation, and undeniable attraction. At first, our interactions remained casual, seemingly innocent. He would stop by to talk about trivial things, help with small errands, or share neighborhood news. But beneath the surface, a silent current of intimacy was building, one that neither of us could ignore. The way he smiled at me lingered in my thoughts long after he left. The way he listened made me feel understood in ways my marriage sometimes could not. I tried to suppress my feelings, telling myself that these were fleeting, harmless emotions. But the more I saw him, the harder it became to deny the chemistry between us. Small gestures, a hand brushing mine, a lingering look, a laugh shared in secret, stirred emotions I hadn't anticipated. I found myself replaying our conversations, analyzing every word, every nuance, craving the attention and emotional closeness that seemed to bypass my husband. The guilt was suffocating. I loved my husband, but I couldn't shake the excitement I felt in this forbidden connection. I would find myself torn between loyalty and desire, sometimes crying alone at night, asking myself how I had allowed myself to be drawn into this. Yet, despite the self-recrimination, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His presence filled a void I hadn't fully acknowledged, a need for attention, understanding, and emotional intimacy that had gone unmet for too long. Our conversations became more personal, touching on dreams, fears, and past regrets. He revealed sides of himself I hadn't known existed, vulnerabilities, ambitions, and emotions that created a sense of closeness unlike anything I had experienced. And in turn, I shared parts of myself I had never confessed to anyone, secrets tucked away even from my husband. The more we confided in each other, the deeper the emotional bond grew. It was intoxicating, dangerous, and utterly consuming. Sometimes, I would catch myself imagining scenarios that should never have existed, daydreams of being together, feeling the warmth of his gaze and the comfort of being understood. I felt trapped in a paradox. The very connection that thrilled me was the one thing that could destroy my marriage. I was fully aware of the stakes, yet my emotions had begun to override reason. Despite the excitement, the affair brought constant tension. Every interaction with my husband felt weighted with guilt. Every smile shared with the neighbor's son became a silent betrayal. I started noticing subtle signs that my husband sensed something was changing. Lingering glances, a slight coldness in his tone, questions I could not answer honestly. The affair, still mostly emotional at this stage, had already begun to fracture the stability I had once taken for granted. What had started as a seemingly innocent evening had now evolved into a web of secrets, half-truths, and intense emotional dependency. The line between right and wrong blurred, replaced by a complicated mixture of desire, guilt, and fear. And with each passing day, the gravity of what I had allowed to happen became undeniable. I was no longer just a bystander to temptation. I was a participant, caught in a delicate and dangerous dance that threatened everything I held dear. The truth didn't arrive suddenly. It crept in quietly, through the little things that couldn't be ignored any longer. I sensed it first in the tension at home, the way my husband's glances lingered a second too long on my phone, or the way he asked seemingly casual questions that carried an unspoken weight. Then came the day when the invisible walls I had built around my secret crumbled completely. Something had been discovered, maybe a message, a misstep, a slip of the tongue, and suddenly, the fragile balance that had allowed the affair to continue was shattered. The confrontation was inevitable. My husband's eyes were heavy with hurt, betrayal, and confusion when he asked the question that would change everything. Is there someone else? My chest tightened, my breath caught, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of my choices crashing down. The lies, the stolen moments, the emotional connection I had nurtured in secret, all of it stood exposed under his gaze. I wanted to deny it, to make excuses, but I couldn't. The truth was undeniable. and it burned brighter than any lie I could have told. He wanted answers, and I tried to give them, stumbling over my words, tears streaming down my face. I explained the emotional closeness, the conversations, the unintended connection, but in the process, I realized that words could never undo the damage. His face, a mix of anger and heartbreak, mirrored my own despair. I had hurt the one person I loved most, and no explanation, no apology, could erase the betrayal. Then came the hardest part, the neighbor's son. The man I had allowed into my life, into my heart, became a symbol of everything I had jeopardized. My husband's disappointment and anger weren't just directed at me. They were directed at him too, and I saw the shame and regret in his eyes. The reality of our actions I had once convinced myself were harmless, was now undeniable. I realized that trust, once broken, leaves a wound that words alone cannot heal. The days that followed were suffocating. Arguments, silence, tears, and attempts at explanations filled our home. Every corner of the life I had built now felt tainted with betrayal. Even simple routines, making breakfast, watching television, walking through the neighborhood, carried reminders of the affair. I found myself replaying every interaction, every choice, and asking, how did it come to this? How could I let this happen? The neighbor's son faded from my home, but his presence lingered in memory, a constant reminder of the fracture he had contributed to. My husband and I attempted conversations, therapy, and moments of reconciliation, but the air remained heavy with unspoken questions and lingering pain. The bond we once shared had been irrevocably altered, and though love remained, it now existed alongside hurt, mistrust, and the shadow of betrayal. The betrayal revealed more than just the affair. It revealed the fragility of human trust, the consequences of choices made in moments of weakness, and the painful reality that emotional intimacy with someone outside a committed relationship can destroy everything you once held dear. That revelation marked the point of no return, a turning point where life as I had known it ended, and the journey toward healing and self-discovery began. After the betrayal was laid bare, life felt like walking through a storm with no shelter in sight. The comfort and security I had once known were gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness that echoed in every corner of my home. Even the simplest routines, making coffee in the morning, walking through the living room, turning on the television, reminded me of what had been broken. I felt betrayed, not only by the neighbor's son but by my own choices and by the marriage I had once thought unshakable. The emotional weight pressed down on me, leaving me exhausted and uncertain how to move forward. In the beginning, I withdrew. Friends reached out, but I couldn't face them. Their concern felt intrusive, and I didn't want pity. I avoided social gatherings, declined calls, and spent hours alone, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Guilt and shame became constant companions, reminders of every misstep, every moment of temptation I had allowed to grow. I questioned myself endlessly. Why did I let it happen? Could I have stopped it sooner? Was there something lacking in my marriage that led me here? Slowly, I realized that isolation wasn't helping. I began to take small steps toward reclaiming my life. Journaling became a daily practice, a way to pour out the anger, sadness, and confusion that I could not share with anyone else. Writing helped me untangle my thoughts, confront my emotions, and understand that while I had made mistakes, I was not beyond redemption. Each sentence became a small act of self-care, a way to regain control over my own narrative. I also sought support outside my immediate circle. Therapy offered a safe space to explore my feelings, confront guilt, and rebuild self-worth. I learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but understanding it, acknowledging the pain, and finding ways to move forward without letting it define me. Walking in nature, reconnecting with old friends, and engaging in hobbies I had neglected all became part of this slow, deliberate process. With time, my perspective began to shift. I recognized that while the affair had caused pain, it also revealed areas of my life that needed attention, boundaries, communication, and self-awareness. I began setting limits, not only with others, but with myself, learning to protect my emotional well-being without shutting myself off entirely from love and connection. My husband and I attempted to navigate this new reality together. We had difficult conversations, confrontations, and moments of raw vulnerability. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, and trust was fragile, but acknowledging the pain and facing it head-on allowed us to start rebuilding a different kind of relationship, one informed by awareness, accountability, and effort. Even if the marriage didn't return to its former state, we learned that growth could emerge from heartbreak. Through this journey, I discovered resilience I hadn't known existed. The betrayal that once seemed like the end became a catalyst for personal growth. Slowly, I began to reclaim my sense of self, my independence, and my ability to trust, not blindly, but wisely. Picking up the pieces wasn't easy, and it wasn't linear, but each small step forward became a testament to the human capacity to heal, to forgive, and to rebuild life after heartbreak. Time didn't erase the pain, it softened it. The sharp sting of betrayal eventually dulled into something less consuming, something I could carry without breaking under the weight. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy, filled with setbacks and breakthroughs. But slowly, I found myself learning lessons I never expected, lessons carved into me by heartbreak, but ones that shaped me into someone stronger than I had ever been. The first lesson was about trust. I had given it so freely before, handing over pieces of myself without hesitation, believing that love and friendship were unshakable. Now I understood that trust isn't just about giving, it's about protecting. I learned to set boundaries, to listen to my instincts, and to respect the quiet warnings I once ignored. The second lesson was about identity. For so long, I had defined myself by my relationships: wife, best friend, partner in someone else's story. When those roles crumbled, I was forced to look inward and ask, who am I without them? The answer didn't come easily, but with each passing day, I discovered pieces of myself I had forgotten: my creativity, my independence, my resilience. I realized I wasn't just someone's wife or someone's best friend. I was me, and that was enough. The third lesson was about love, not the romantic kind, but the kind I had neglected for years: self-love. It's easy to forget yourself when you're pouring everything into others. Betrayal forced me to stop, to look at myself with compassion instead of criticism. I learned to celebrate small victories, to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner, and to remind myself daily that being broken didn't mean I was unworthy of love. Moving forward wasn't about revenge, nor was it about pretending the betrayal never happened. It was about acceptance. Accepting that people can disappoint us in unimaginable ways. Accepting that relationships can end, even when you thought they were unbreakable. And accepting that endings, as painful as they are, can also be beginnings. I didn't have all the answers about what my future would hold. Maybe I would find love again, maybe I wouldn't. Maybe I would one day forgive them, or maybe forgiveness wasn't necessary for my healing. What mattered was that I had survived, and survival itself was a kind of victory. One day, I walked past a cafe where my husband and I used to go, and instead of crumbling, I smiled faintly. The memory was still there, but it no longer had power over me. Another day, I saw his name flash across my phone, and instead of anger, I felt nothing, and that nothing was freedom. The betrayal that once defined me became just one chapter in my story, not the whole book. And as I moved forward, I carried the lessons with me, not as chains, but as armor. Because in the end, heartbreak didn't destroy me. It transformed me. And though I never would have chosen this path, I walked out of it stronger, wiser, and finally free to write the rest of my story on my own terms.